shadow dances, I am still. Peace is my companion. Joy is my friend. The campfire, the stars, the slight breeze, the taste of the hot chocolate, and the dancing shadows are, in themselves, enough. Here I am. Why waste time wanting to be somewhere else? Join me by the campfire.
Well, greetings to everybody. I am Aaron Simmons, and I'm joined at the campfire tonight by three friends, and super excited to be able to talk tonight about artificial intelligence and human flourishing. I will admit I'm not entirely sure where that will take us, and so I've got the right people sitting here with me to think about these issues. And so let me just give a quick introduction to each, and then we'll dive in. So Lauren Horn Griffin is an assistant professor at LSU and works primarily, from what I understand, on social media issues and questions of how concepts function relative to religious communities, but then also how religion and technology works, teaches classes on these issues. And so please make sure that you go check out her website, get connected with her. I know she's got connections to her social media in different places. And so wonderful, wonderful scholar. Do check out her work. Then also, I am joined by Nathan Loewen, who is a professor down at University of Alabama in the Department of Religious Studies. But he actually also does some amazing work on the faculty technology liaison side, which is actually part of his position, and so helps all of the faculty at the University of Alabama, be able to use technology in effective ways. And so I am sure that he has more than once said, have you tried turning it off and turning it on again? And so I fully expect him to help us all tonight if we have issues. And I'll also mention he is co-editing a book called Artificial Intelligence in 5 Minutes. Should be out in a couple years, but it's in the works. And so here's a link to that. Please go check it out. You can go ahead and pre-order and different things. And so really excited to have him with us. And also, if any of you are interested in the awesome things going on there at the University of Alabama in the the Department of Religious Studies and their digital lab, please do link up with them as well. Amazing work going on. I've been unbelievably impressed with how kind of early adoptive they have been over the last many years and getting technology integrated into pedagogy in unbelievably cool ways. So very excited to have Nathan with us. And then also one of my very close friends, Jack Hansen, who is currently retired, though he is certainly not slowing down. Jack was working for NASA for quite a while, did a lot in early AI research, and has his PhD from MIT, and has also written a couple books about finding meaning and joy in retirement. And so here are some links to the work he's doing. He is still a widely sought after speaker all over the country and world. And he and I are actually doing a little speaking tour over the next year, talking about artificial intelligence and the philosophical issues that it raises. And so he and I are going to be traveling around the Southeast on a little speaking tour together. So extremely excited to have all of them with us tonight. Thank you all so much for joining me here by the campfire.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes.
Well, why don't we just start off by, before we jump in, to all the people watching. Again, we are live streaming, so if you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts, drop those into whatever comment function you have, whether that be on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. All of those will dump into us, and we'll be able to get you involved in the conversation. So please join us here by the campfire. Drop your comments in. Think with us as we go forward. So, Lauren, what does artificial intelligence mean to you as somebody who studies religion and history? I know you've got kind of joint appointments. How does that even play out? Like, let's get the conversation started by a humanities person talking to us about artificial intelligence. What's that look like?
Yeah, so I'm interested in both the past and present of machine learning and just ideas of right now I'm really interested historically in ideas of information overload or fear of new technologies historically, and how people in the past dealt with those feelings of overwhelm when things were rapidly changing. So my first book was actually on the early modern period, although my current book project focuses on contemporary representations of Catholic communities online. But the first book was looked a lot at the printing press and changes in modes of history and the discipline of history, moving into antiquarianism, and just how they thought differently and how they dealt with the information overload that they felt was going on, and just rapid, what they felt was really rapid technological advances. So I'm interested in those questions. And then thinking about just the history of machine learning, and I'm actually interested, maybe you all can speak to this, when we started calling it AI, like because I feel like when I read tech stuff, there's certain people who still call it machine learning primarily, and then sometimes they'll switch into artificial intelligence. So I'm interested in like sort of when, like, I don't know if it was like in the 90s when like digital, I don't know, but like what those things signal to maybe insiders, or when the artificial intelligence, because that's a really loaded term, right? And so when we went from machines that learn to intelligence that's artificial is like a really interesting question, and one that my religion and AI class tackles. So what do you guys think?
What do you think about that, Jack? Because I know you actually were involved in some of that early stuff.
Well, not the earliest, but I think that it's fair to say that artificial intelligence, at least as a concept, you can certainly trace back to Turing's work. And, in the 1930s, he put forward the proposition that a machine could do any calculation that a human could do. And that was a kind of the first sort of statement about equivalence. And that had nothing to do whether it was a learning algorithm or a logic algorithm or so forth. And the whole idea of the Turing test, which he put forward in about 1950, the idea is basically that that an algorithm running on a computer passes the Turing test when its progress in solving a complicated problem is equivalent to and indistinguishable from that of a human expert. And of course, involved in that is something. Is a perspective about artificial intelligence, like it's a competition between what a person could do and what a machine or an algorithm running on a machine can do. And if you look at the history of artificial intelligence, there are kind of two streams of development, and they are rather distinct. One. And this really came to the fore beginning in the early 1960s. One is essentially simulation or emulation of forms of logic, like means in and out, like model-based reasoning, like expert systems, and so forth. The other is the use of a computer architecture called an artificial neural network. And most of the time now, when people talk about machine learning, what they're really talking about is an artificial neural network that is trained, that is to say that the weights of the network are changed by training that network using known inputs and outputs. And if you look at the AI literature today, it's almost like artificial intelligence began in 2020 with ChatGPT or something like that, but that's far from the case.
And so when you talk about artificial neural nets, so this is something I still struggle with. Does that mean that it is modeled on the way that brains work? So the artificial neural net, or does it mean that it is functioning in a way that is networking and it's just an analogy to neurological wording? Like what is the neural net doing as a phrase?
So one way to look at it, and this is an overly simplified way, but one way to look at it is that those who put forward the concept of a neural network initially, and this goes back, I think, at least as I recall, to the 1960s or so, was that a brain consists of neural pathways and neurons. Okay. So they conceived that you could have an artificial network where each neuron would be equivalent to a very simple computer. And each interconnect between simple computers could be thought of as a neural pathway. So it's a very crude analog. And so to your point, it's really not, that's all it is. It's maybe analog is even too strong a word.
Yeah.
It's a computer architecture.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with what Jack's saying, that a lot of the words that people are using to try to get a grasp of this, or what we might call suitcase words, they're words that travel all over the place, and they travel well because they don't name things very clearly or concisely. And as a result, we have words like memory for computers. And then everyone's like, oh yeah, that's like my memory. So can an LLM get Parkinson's? Well, because it has memory, doesn't it? And I mean, that's not the case. And likewise for artificial neural network, or all of the different ways that people like to talk too quickly, probably, about how to create an analog between what an artificial intelligence device is doing or machine is doing, and what humans do with their brains, or what animals do with their brains. There aren't always immediate one-to-one correspondences, and that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah. Huh. So when we talk about this idea of like the Turing test, which also makes me think as a philosopher of, John Searle's notion of the Chinese box, right?
Yeah.
And, the basic idea that we can pass code back and forth, linguistic phrases. When we can't tell that it's a computer sending us these phrases, then it seems like that we would assume we're talking then to a human, and maybe that then crosses some sort of threshold. I always wrestle with, is it simply a matter of recognition? And so maybe, Lauren, this is a way, at least I think about the shift in wording from machine learning, where we're still articulating machines, to intelligence, which I don't usually associate with machines. Like we talk about smartphones, but, again, that's an easier ask, I think. But when I think about recognizing something as not just a particular kind of thing, right? I can recognize a cup, a shoelace, a dog, and a teddy bear, and say, well, these are different types of things. But that's different than recognizing something as the same sort of being that I take myself to be, right? In some sort of, morally significant sense, or some existentially relevant sense. And I take it that that's at stake, for me at least, when I think about something being intelligent. It's that I'm now noticing in it the thing that I take seriously in me that has all of these trappings of things like moral dignity. Do you all take that to be in play? Or again, is this a suitcase, Nathan, that you see as like, you've overloaded that suitcase, man. It's not going to fit in the overhead compartment.
Seems like a pretty heavy suitcase to me. I mean, and that's the great thing. Like our overall talk is about AI and human flourishing. I mean, one of the great things is that this discussion, this discourse of artificial intelligence, and the word intelligence, right? And you've already brought up the Turing test. You've brought up philosophical approaches like phenomenology. And Lauren, I'm sure, can speak to this from a religious studies perspective, that in all of these cases, the flourishing, version of flourishing might be that this is a moment that demands us to become more careful with our words and to parse out words more clearly. And when we have suitcase words, that we realize maybe across a more broad spectrum, that we need to define things a little bit more clearly, either come up with new words or abandon meanings for old ones, so that when we use the word intelligence, we're not talking about consciousness, we're not talking about reflexive cognition. What are the things that we're talking about? Because the word intelligence is just too broad, right?
Yeah.
Unless, and the great thing is some people talk about artificial general intelligence. Well, now, once the word general is in front of that, now all the stuff that you put into that suitcase, boom, there it is, because we just said the word general. Oh, okay, so everything's at play now. I mean, so this is a thing, blah, 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 cascading consequences of that word.
Right.
But AI in itself, we're not talking as cognitive psychologists when we're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking here computer science, CS. That's what we're working with. And so when we talk about artificial neural network, also, as Jack said, this is what we're talking about. The word network means a very specific thing. The word neural means a very specific thing. And if the public, can get around their heads around that, that's going to be opportunity for flourishing that no university degree could ever provide to all of the public.
That's interesting. Of course, I'm now thinking about the How I Met Your Mother running joke of general intelligence. So I'm entirely fine with general intelligence as long as we salute every time. So Lauren, what does this play out for your students? Because I'm trying to think about how these words do the work that they do. And again, for me as a phenomenologist, my specialty is deconstruction phenomenology, existentialism. It almost always is going to throw me back into questions of things like, well, if X is intelligent, does X then have sufficient properties to count as a moral entity, right? And for me, that's where I'm landing. And Nathan, I take your warning, that word's doing too much work there. I mean, do your students do this, Lauren, in your religion technology class, or are they better than we 47-year-olds at keeping these things distinctive?
No, I think the question of, I think it's really easy to center personhood and humanity in the conversation. So a strong human essentialism, focusing on human identity, even this, the way we framed it here, human flourishing. There's still this real assumption of humanity at the center of the universe, scientific progress. I think that's still really baked in. There's a lot of neoliberal, sometimes, I don't know. Anyway, a lot of neoliberal assumptions about progress are still really there, because sometimes I feel really afraid and dystopic a lot of most of the time. So when I see my fresh-faced 18-year-olds, I expect them to be oh, we all know that everything sucks, and they don't feel this way. So they're still really everything is progressing still. They still this really, I don't know. So we ask questions what is special about the human in relation to AI? Is there anything special about the human in relation to AI? But a lot of the course, because I'm primarily interested in kind of the social implications of advances in technology. So we start with the complexity of both of terms, religion and AI, right? And we kind of muddy those waters a little bit. What do they mean? How are they used? How they're complex, right? And we sort of, think about the suitcasiness of these words and what they bring with them, and what different people bring. And then it really looks at digital hyperconnectivity more broadly. So just the reality of our all-encompassing digital everywhere all the time, with the focus on machine learning, through a social theory lens. So that's what sort of the course does. So one of the first things we do in the class is, on one of the first days, we look at how LLMs and even DALL-E or image generating generative AI, how they shape ideas of religion in terms we see religious. So we'll ask, for example, we asked ChatGPT to tell us jokes about certain figures and see what AI thinks is sacred versus what it's not. So will it tell us jokes about Jesus? It won't. It says I can't do that. Will it do it about we did it with a few other people? We just shout out names. We did it with a few others, and it would tell jokes about other gods and goddesses. It would not tell a joke about Martin Luther King Jr. So anyway, the idea is we're looking at what the machine has considered sacred or not. So that's a fun exercise we do. We also put in a variety of terms like prayer, or they'll shout out things. We'll put it into DALL-E and see what it generates. And obviously almost immediately gendered and racialized images will emerge. And so we'll think about why that's the case. So that's one of the things we start out with thinking, and one that more directly involves the generative aspect.
Well, and so I think Jack, go ahead, Jason. If I could pop in here, I think Jack could probably speak to this. I mean, the examples that you gave, Lauren, as I listen to them, I'm it's not the it that's providing those to you, it's the people who've trained and built it and designed it. And I guess that's where you get the students around to. But I mean, when Jack was talking about artificial neural networks, he talked about training. And I think that's so essential in this discussion about AI for people to understand the word training, which when people read artificial intelligence, they don't hear in brackets, trained is the word that comes before that, artificial intelligence. And could you say something about that, Jack?
Well, I'm sure that books are written about this, right? But yeah, I think it's important with generative AI, and let's take large language models specifically. What they are trained on is large volumes of text. And what that training really accomplishes is it makes them very good predictors of the very next letter in a grammatically correct sentence or paragraph. Interestingly enough, what is not there is any logic test. So in other words, it's no surprise that in some very high profile demonstrations of generative artificial intelligence over the last couple of months, including one done by Forbes, I think it was a Perplexity, you know, the from the ground up generative AI search tool and so forth. You get logical nonsense, even though you get grammatic correctness.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the fundamental limitations, in my opinion, underneath generative AI and under deep learning, which is the use of artificial neural networks to solve specific problems. So you can expect more success there than you can in the generative world. Still, we don't know how, I mean, the community does not know how to build logical correctness into the training. So if you have a combination of logical and illogical literature that you've used to train, I guess it would be no surprise that you would have a combination of logical and illogical paragraphs being generated.
Of course, that's not all that different from, you know, the training of our kids, right? I mean, I know Nathan and I, full disclosure.
I guess that's a suitcase word again. Sorry. Someone in the chat brought up RAG, so that's yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Aaron.
No, please. I mean, the thing that I guess I'm just trying to think, like, when my son was small, he would put words together, but they may or may not make semantic sense, or, you know, even if the syntax was correct, or sometimes they would be syntactically okay, but it was detached from something like the lived context in which language utterance was being articulated. So I guess I'm just wondering if, when we add the qualifier training, as Nathan, I think you're exactly right to say that's got to be part of it, because Lauren, if we're going to think about, you know, what ChatGPT will or will not make jokes about, the question of whether it is deciding this crosses a barrier is not really what's in play. It's reflecting what's been programmed as the barrier it can't cross. But again, like, at what point, and I know we're not cognitive psychologists, but it seems to me that there's still going to be this slipperiness, because at some level, if you raise your kids to be a particular way, then they will see lines that exist in particular ways as well. And so it seems like when we really start to distinguish artificial intelligence from something like human existence or human personhood, I guess for me, though I see that as a hard line, as a phenomenologist, I start really seeing, man, this is fuzzy though, right? Because anywhere we're going to start parsing it, it looks an awful lot like this is the way that we raise humans into something that we would call judgment, right? I mean, so where do y'all see some of these maybe slippages occurring, or how they, you know, where is this analogy failing, I guess? I don't know. And maybe Nathan, explain what RPG is too.
Well, it's retrieval augmented generation, and I mean, let's not get into the weeds too much on this, but there are, you know, as Jack will know, there are supervised and unsupervised ways of doing machine learning, and the LLMs that we work with for like Llama or ChatGPT use these in different sorts of ways. And then we also have training that involved until they weren't needed anymore, massive numbers of laborers in the 2/3 world, or in what might we call it, places in continental Africa and continental South Asia, manually going through prompts and making sure that the prompts work the way they are to work. So when, again, the training involves, as Jack said, changing weights on things, or letting the LLM think about its weights and then seeing what those are. And there are different ways of rewarding the models for that. But then we also have this massive amount of labor that has gone on in the background for very low pay. If we're talking about human flourishing, the massive numbers of people who've worked for pittances, while Western corporations have made tons of money and hope to make tons of money on these things. And then at the moment where they're not needed anymore, they're all let go, right? And so what kind of human flourishing, if I'm a tech worker in Ghana who's been doing all of this training work and now has no opportunity for further employment, what kind of flourishing did I experience? Did I invest all the money that I earned in stocks in Google? I don't know. I don't know those people. But these are, when we're talking about flourishing, there are different kinds of layers of the onion to talk about. Oh, how does model rewarding work? Basically, there's so much to talk about. I'll say an example of a place to go to learn this. There is something called and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, the TWIML podcast, TWIML podcast, which is incredibly good at taking the complexities of AI and putting them into everyday language. And I'll give the link to Aaron and put it in the context. But I don't think we can get into the weeds for all of this stuff too fast. But these are great questions that are really technical that are coming up. But Sam Charrington has this great podcast that'll help to elaborate on the technical aspects of, like, what is retrieval augmented generation? How do you reward an AI? My son and I were listening today to a podcast about training AIs to navigate built environments with no prompts, which is like so cool, just in a coolness level thing, right? And I can't even begin to talk about it, but it was just so fascinating, and it involves everything that we're talking about, because that's the next step, to try to figure out how can we do this training, how can we do this work with these models in ways that don't necessarily involve massive amounts of low-paid labor. But then again, hopefully, if we loop around, how in the world will that help everybody in the 2/3 world? What kind of human flourishing do we want? Do we want increased GDP per capita for America, which means if massive amounts of rich people earn lots of more money, but most of us don't get paid anything, the GDP per capita goes up because the weight is skewed? Or do we want a good Gini coefficient, which takes the top fifth and lower fifth between the GDP of a population and says how close are those to each other? And so if we want that as flourishing, if we want the general wealth of humans and our living circumstances to increase as the result of AI, what metrics are we using to measure that? And everybody in the world, are we including everybody? Are we only including the people with shares in Google? Are we talking about me living in Alabama? Who are we talking about? What metric are we going to use to measure that? All of this, there's so many layers to this onion.
Yeah, in addition to like labor concerns, then you have environmental concerns, as well as the AI-driven inequalities from like algorithmic bias and facial surveillance. So like you can get into like all of the inequality, through capitalism. But I think one thing my students in the religion AI class walk away from thinking or realizing, I think, is that power has become really concentrated in a small group of homogenous people, and that money has done its usual job of corrupting. So how much of our government institutions have sort of failed us with all of this digital engagement. We have no algorithmic transparency, no privacy protections, things like antitrust laws that haven't caught up. As a parent, I can say there's like way too little focus on issues of like addiction and mental impact with the amount of digital stuff. I can't believe schools don't have more regulations on phones and all the things. It's truly wild to think there has been no significant guidelines governing these areas for kids or adults.
In America, in the United States.
You think it's better elsewhere? Is it better elsewhere?
Well, the EU has passed several regulations that Google and Facebook and Apple and Amazon are completely upset about, right? So there are regulations. The tech industry is at war with government regulation in order to make sure that, the free market that we might call it is free for some people and absolutely unfree for the user on the other end of the interface, right? I mean, but that's always how it is. They're serving you beef. Are you going to have meatloaf, steak, or meatballs? But you're going to get beef no matter what. But that's how it is, and that's part of what the question of human flourishing is. Are we talking about the flourishing of individuals? Are we talking about the flourishing of corporations? There are a lot of different ways to slice and dice that thing, and I think, Lauren, you're pointing to a whole bunch of issues there. I was talking to a person in an informal conversation from the Future of Humanity Institute as I was trying to work on this book that I'm working on. And I wanted this person to write a chapter on, will AI produce an era of unprecedented goodness? Just write about it. And the person decided, no, I can't write about this thing. But in our conversation, we went through all these different rabbit holes of, well, what could an unprecedented era of benefit for humanity look like? And at the end of the day, it comes up to us people. I mean, man, darn it.
Do you think the unprecedented good, though? When I think unprecedented good, I tend to think radically non-technological. I mean, certainly not without technology at some level, still having, vehicles to get us to the outdoors, or, the bike shops where you can buy the gears to do the things to fix the hobbies that we have, right? But it does seem to me like when people, at least in my family, when we go on a trip, we say, hey, let's go spend 2 days, let's quote unquote get away, like the vacation-y modes, the opportunities we have to go flourish intentionally. It tends to be where we say, well, let's shut down the devices. Let's go be together as, humans in some real sense. Or do you see that, in fact, technology is a means to that end? In the sense that, well, technology in many ways will allow lots of formerly human labor necessities now not to require human labor, and therefore maybe facilitate something more like the ability of getting away and having leisure, because technology has been able to minimize the requirements of work. I mean, how is it that you would cash that out when it comes to flourishing being technologically facilitated, or a kind of escape from the technological expectations?
It seems to me like we have different perspectives on what flourishing could be. So let me suggest another way of thinking about flourishing, and it has to, and it's really closely related to different objectives that have been at the heart of different strands of the development of artificial intelligence. So, a lot of what we talk about in artificial intelligence really has to do with an attempt to develop a capability to replace a person or a person's particular capability. But there's another strand of artificial intelligence that, really, I think it can at least be traced back to the 1990s, which has as its objective to leverage and extend human performance, not replace it. So you can, just give you a couple examples, and this is much more limited. This is not human flourishing in some grand sense, but it's thinking about how whatever your or my assigned task is, how could artificial intelligence make us better and more effective at it? So, for example, today, every time you are in a commercial aircraft that takes off from an airport, the air traffic controllers that are guiding the trajectory of your plane and the other 5,000 planes that are in the air over the continental United States are depending on a set of AI-enabled advisory tools. So those tools make air traffic controllers better air traffic controllers. Another example, and this is something that has been deployed fairly broadly in the developing world, as I understand it. Going back to the 1970s, there was the development of a form of artificial intelligence called expert systems. And the idea was to encode the expertise of experts in a particular domain so that their expertise could be queried by a person who was not an expert. And that was first done in medicine, specifically in terms of diagnosing infectious diseases. It was very successful, but not cost effective. But in more recent times, it has been used as sort of a digital agricultural extension service. So suppose you are a farmer in a remote part of the world, and you raise a particular crop, and you're uncertain about a disease that seems to be attacking the crop. You can use your phone, take a picture, upload it to that service, and get back a diagnosis and a recommended treatment. So it's making that farmer who has otherwise no access to what, in the United States has been the Agricultural Extension Service, help that person make a better help that person be a better farmer. And there are hundreds of examples like that, but that's just a little bit different take on what human flourishing might be.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And how it might be enabled by specific forms of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I really appreciate.
Oh,
go
yeah,
ahead,
go ahead,
Lauren.
Nathan.
Nah.
You.
Okay, all right.
Oh,
well, I mean, you've got the conch.
No, I just was going to say that I think that the question usually does come down to efficiency, right? Like the idea of like can AI make us more efficient? And while I certainly want my air traffic controllers and the people who grow the crops to have those tools, I do wonder if efficiency is always best, or if the machine, if automating everything will actually end up resulting in flourishing for whom, right? So just because we become faster or more efficient at doing a task doesn't mean that the people doing those tasks are going to reap those rewards. We're more productive than ever and wages just haven't gone up. So who will benefit, who will flourish from general efficiency, if we think about it large scale? And isn't there, I don't know, I read somewhere the other day about I don't want AI to write my movies and novels. I want it to do my dishes or whatever, kind of thinking about during the writer's crisis. And so the idea is I don't want it to do my art. I want it to do my work, right? And I totally get that 100%. But doing the dishes or doing menial tasks with our hands and touching the stuff that we, I don't know. I wonder, do we have to sort of do those is it kind of like the shower principle? Are those moments of when our mind is at rest and we're doing a rote, very tactile task? Is it important for us to keep doing those things? What happens when we do, if we were to stop? I don't know. I wonder about things like that when I think of efficiency and automation.
I think
along the lines.
Perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead, Jack. Good name.
We're all too too polite. I think that whether you're a physician or a farmer or an air traffic controller, there are a broad set of domains in which accuracy is important. So if you're there's been a lot of work done on the use of AI methodologies, and some of the recent work really quite successful. For example, in the breast cancer domain, and much more accurately predicting the likelihood of an individual developing breast cancer over a certain period of time in the future than has existed previously. And, again, if we talk about maybe effectiveness of the physician or whoever the person is that we depend on, that looks to me like a win. But I see what you're saying too, that you can imagine circumstances where it's a net loss.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, I saw somebody mention in the chat that trade might be replaced. And as somebody who is an electrician, I mean, although I work at a university now, I'm a little bit defensive about that. I was doing a sideline job for a friend. I have no idea how AI could have helped me wire that art gallery. I have no clue. What it can do, and there actually is a friend of mine or an acquaintance of mine in Birmingham who's now moved away, who has started a company that applies AI to creating quotes for electrical quotes for wiring for industrial and residential work. And that's cool, right? So a house, I built this little house that's behind me. So I've got the architectural plans that could be done by AI. How do I maximize the amount of square footage according to the residential regulations I've got? Come up with a blueprint for me. Great. Now I frame it out. Now it's time for the rough in. I have to do the electrical. I have to do the plumbing. Got to figure out I had to figure out this staircase behind me. How am I going to do that to apply to code? The AI can kind of help me, maybe probably with figuring out those angles. I still got my hands. And then when I'm drilling, right, I had to do, you can't even see it behind me. There is a plumbing stack that comes up by that light switch there. Then it heads over to this direction, and behind that light switch over there on that wall, it comes up and pokes through the ceiling of the roof. I had architectural plans didn't include where the plumbing stack should go. And then I had to work on that, right? And then when I did the plumbing, and then I had to figure out how to get the wiring around that. Now we're talking HVAC. How do I get the mechanical into these walls? And that's like a perennial problem, right? I mean, the architect designs the building, and then all the trades got to figure out how to actually build the darn thing. That's all the time. AI can help us with that. It can help us be more efficient as tradespeople working around each other to build a simple house, such as the one I'm in right now. But at the end of the day, there's a long ways to go between me as a tradesperson building a place and a robot, plumbing robot, and an electrician robot, and an HVAC robot, and a framer robot, and a flooring robot, and a floor finishing robot, and a painting robot, and a roofing robot. All that, come on, man. That's not going to happen. What could happen is that, which is what is happening in the United States, is we got no tradespeople. We're bringing on apprentices who are 40 years old. What in the world? Because no 18-year-old thinks that a good trade, a good job that they can make $80K a year is actually pulling wire. Turns out it's a great job that can make you $80K a year. Nobody's taking those jobs because they think, well, I got to do computers. You'll learn computers. You'll learn wiring. You'll learn how circuits work. And along the way, you're going to learn how computers function. And you'll learn AI. Replace. There's no roofer that's going to get replaced by AI.
Well, do you think that this could even maybe be a positive relative to some of those capitalistic forces that we might have all sorts of critical responses to, right? Who's benefiting? How is this playing out? Who's, able to program? Whose voices are being reflected? All of that, money and power equal influence on the front end. Is there also possibly a way of realizing, as AI does, supplement or even replace human labor in lots of spaces, the areas where it is less apt to do so, like the trades work, maybe that's something that then allows those sorts of skill sets, those sorts of abilities to become more market relevant? They actually become more compelling? Or do you think that there's a pressure that would not allow that to kind of flip the other direction, right? I mean, as you know, Nathan, I used to do a lot of painting, and was a subcontract painter forever. And the idea that AI might make my paint sprayer more effective, or do some sort of
helping you clean it at the end of the day
better. right. I mean, like, I would be fine if there was a robot that I could hand the sprayer to and it would just, wash it all out. That sounds great to me, right? But the idea of actually applying this paint, doing so in particular ways, knowing all kinds of, just like yesterday, I was talking to a friend of mine and he's got this really problematically sloped yard and he's trying to paint a gable, but I can't put the ladder there. How do I make this work? And so I was telling him, well, you build basically a base level of scaffolding. You can do this with cement blocks and a piece of plywood and a 2x4. And the idea that this sort of functional, getting your hands dirty to make a thing happen is not something AI replaces. And I wonder if maybe it actually makes that sort of learning, that kind of abilities more, more respected, right? I mean, we talk about this a lot in the humanities. Go ahead.
There's no AI that's going to help our governments figure out their domestic policy to change that. I mean, come on. So the place that AI is going to replace people are the managerial classes. I mean, so what you can train an AI to do is to make managerial decisions, and that's going to get lots better really quickly. So the people who need to hold on tight to their jobs and watch them disappear is all middle management and even senior management. Start to build a farm level decisions that are statistically dependent, right? That we've used Bayesian thought and statistical management in the corporate world for a long time, and those calculations are going to get faster and better, and we won't need people to do them. So how can I, if I'm have a new product and I want to bring it to market, and I want market diffusion to be at a certain rate that's commensurate with what I have in terms of my supply dealers or my manufacturers who are offshore to wherever with certain transportation costs. Let's say it's a bicycle, right? AI can do that and help me with that. It can help me with supply chain. It can help me with marketing. It can help me with distribution. It can help me with endpoint sales. It can help me with customer service. It can even, and as we know, it can build wheels. It can kind of do welding, but we're going to get there. Like the Mercedes factory right here in Tuscaloosa, incredible welding currently with their robots. So we might get there with that, but there are certain things that it's going to take so much longer, probably a decade, before we see complex physical activities being done by AIs. I don't know, but I might be wrong.
Well, I will say, I think it was Steve in the comments said we just need to get self-leveling ladders, and that sounds like a brilliant idea to me. So I am entirely in favor of that. Well, let's take a quick break, hear from the sponsor of Campfire Philosophy, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation. As always, if you're watching live, please drop a comment. We'll do our best to try to involve you in the conversation, and it certainly helps us be able to speak to the things that you think are relevant. So we'll see you in a second. I hope you are enjoying Campfire Philosophy. I would like to take a moment to thank Planksip for sponsoring the show. Daniel Sanderson is the guy behind that media outlet, and he is a fellow lover of philosophy. So if you get a chance, head over to planksip.org. That's PLANKSIP.org. If you sign up for their ideal plan and use the offer code AARON, that's AARON, you will get 50% off for the first 6 months. Free book publishing and lots more. Go check them out. And thanks so much to Daniel and Planksip for sponsoring Campfire Philosophy. Now, back to the show. So again, a big thanks to Dan, Planksip. Make sure you go over there. They are doing amazing stuff getting philosophy out to public audiences. Big fan of their work. I subscribe to their newsletter. Drops in my inbox almost daily. And so highly recommend go see planksip.org and use the code Aaron and get some money off. So, Lauren, I want to come back to you on some of these issues, because what it sounds like we're doing is thinking not only about the way in which we have classically narrated value, right? And also then human identity as a response to that, where we tend to assess, some people, quote unquote, as more valuable because they bring certain skill sets to the table. And this is why then, the electricians and the painters tend not to have the same social capital. But you do a lot of work, like you say, on religious communities and the way that they are finding community in virtual spaces. I'm interested in, does AI or the progress in technology actually facilitate something regarding human flourishing in the sense of community building, right? Like tonight, we could not have this conversation, except I guess if we had like four-way calling, if not for technology. We've got 304 people watching live as I speak. If not for technology, they would not be able to do this. So it does seem like that there's a community possibility internal to technology that scholars like you are actually thinking through in really cool ways. What do you think? Is community maybe one of those, points that we can actually celebrate relative to AI? What do you think?
Yeah, I think celebrating versus bemoaning, and it depends on what you mean by community and what communities the internet brings together, right? Because it also brings together harmful communities, or communities many of us would consider harmful. But what I'm interested in is how, regarding community, how we had this idea, right, in the early ages of the internet that it was going to be so democratizing, right, and that it was going to give all of these people a voice. And indeed it did, right? More people have access to stuff and voices, right, than they did previously, certainly. So what it's done is shake up authority. So I'm super interested in this question of authority, and the new book project, it's called #Trads. Or trad, I don't know yet. And it basically looks at traditionalist Catholics online, so a certain type of Catholic online. But what's interesting is that I'm interested in is how sort of various social media platforms and digital hyperconnectivity in general has reworked authority in Catholic communities in the US and abroad. So on one hand, this kind of expansion of access and ability to produce content and communicate and network has undermined the power of kind of traditional Catholic leadership, enabling lay Catholics to sort of shape their own identity and culture and practice. And while this, of course, happened before the internet, people communicated and networked and bucked authority or whatever, but before, it has certainly accelerated it. So I'm interested in how kind of these sort of previously authoritative institutions that were able to hold strong through a lot of social change may well not make it much longer. Do you know what I mean? So like, what does hyperconnectivity do to authority? And a lot of the book looks at algorithmic culture in particularly. So how algorithms and the feeding of content and getting in sort of like our that side of TikTok, as we would say on TikTok, getting in sort of these bubbles and the way content builds on another, the pipeline, and the way so both the reality of it and the way we think and talk about the pipeline or algorithmic culture and how we see it determining us. So this idea of technological determinism. Well, if I'm meant to come back to mass, the algorithm will bring me back, like language like that. So how we sort of use theistic ideas or language to describe algorithmic stuff or machine stuff. I'm really interested in those type of questions. So that's what the book sort of unpacks.
That's awesome.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and before when we were talking about AI and jobs and labor and stuff, I was thinking about how so I take y'all's point about how like I'm not envisioning like Rosie from the Jetsons anytime soon or whatever, but the idea that one thing I do think is, especially even when I'm talking about my book project or just this conversation, there's this fear that anything I say now or anything we project now is going to look silly in 2 months, 6 months, right? We're going to look back and say, it becomes obsolete so fast, right? Because things change at such a rapid pace. And I don't know, when I was a little kid, when I remember the day I learned what the internet was, like I remember the day someone told me, and I was a little kid, and I remember this clip. I don't know if I saw it live, like watching TV, or if I just remember it. It's Bill Gates talking to David Letterman on the show, and David Letterman's show, and he's talking about he's trying to explain the internet, and David Letterman's being like, oh, and he's like, well, you can like stream a baseball game. And he's like, oh, you heard of radio? And he's like, well, you can, talk to a coworker. And he's like, oh, you heard of the telephone or whatever. He's like making these jokes about, and Bill Gates is trying to like explain to him, and like, and this idea that like we don't know, it probably won't look like Rosie from the Jetsons, but we have no idea. Like we have no idea what these things, what they will look like or what they will bring, and so like even just trying to explain what there is now is difficult. But even Bill Gates probably could not have imagined Facebook and Web 2.0, what things became, right? Like he couldn't, even the like with all of his insider knowledge, could not have imagined. So writing about this is really difficult, because I do have this feeling that like as soon as I kind of figure out what it is I want to say, we'll be light years into the future.
Yeah. Jack,
that's great, Lauren. I like
Go
what
ahead, Nathan.
I like what you're saying, and it might connect with Jack's opinions as well, that you're saying that a lot of these things are open tools, right? They're not closed tools. They don't have only one use. They're open tools. Right. And they, whereas a Colt 45, pretty closed tool. I can't use it for a hammer. If I try to use a Colt 45 to put, I can't use a smoke detector to hang a picture. But very open tool. I can do all kinds of things with a hammer. Now, a ChatGPT interface, such as the one that we have, the thing that's been amazing with it is the ways that humans have inventively started to different, prompt engineer. That's a term that came about only after we started to use it. I mean, there's an openness to this technology that David Letterman was like, poking at and trying to help probably Bill Gates to actually be able to articulate in that conversation. And David Letterman probably was ahead of Bill Gates. He knew probably. But that's the great thing about this. And that's where I think when we can talk about flourishing or the future, because this is an open technology, not a Colt 45.
That makes sense. Jack, I wanted to get you to maybe comment on what were some of those conversations like in the 70s and early 80s among the folks that ostensibly had to have some vision to create what we're now inheriting. I mean, what was the sense of what they were trying to do, why they were trying to do it? I mean, I imagine you were in some of those rooms. Did they have a fundamentally different sense, or did they think we would be in other places than we currently are? I mean, what was that like back then?
Well, I mean, I guess, just to take a specific example with artificial neural networks, I mean, my first serious introduction to that was when I was at the Office of Naval Research, and I began funding some early work in artificial neural networks. And I think it's fair to say at that point that it was impossible to envision something like deep learning. It was, I mean, there were much more elementary questions, like with a simple neural network. Can I train it with input and output over a certain range, and then have it be accurate outside of that training range? So really fundamental questions like that. And as a practical matter, most of the advances we've seen, in my opinion, or many of the advances, really have to do with enhancements in computer speed and capability. And I mean, it's no accident that the company NVIDIA, I think that's how you pronounce it, is so much in the press now, because a new chip architecture and set of capabilities and so forth enables certain calculations that underpin some generative AI. They're particularly effective at. But I think it, like in all of the circumstances that you all have talked about, and your concerns about the future, it is impossible to look even a modest amount into the future and be confident that we're seeing it accurately.
Yeah. Where do you all hope it would go? Like, I know we sometimes talk about, things are going off the rails, or, the road to perdition is upon us. What would your in particular vision of AI facilitating something like human flourishing? And again, I should make clear, not in a speciesist sense, right? Not in some sort of, to the exclusion of polar bears and other things, but how is it that we could see a future where our hopes override some of our, I think, very legitimate fears and trepidations? What would that even involve?
Well, if I could just take one thing, it seems to me clear as it relates to generative AI is some discipline about how it's used. So, for example, the whole world of deepfakes is potentially very damaging to political discourse and so forth. But we have no really compelling policy or relating to limiting those nefarious uses.
Yeah, and I mean that comes down to also it's a non-AI question, Aaron, that can be answered. Fill in with technology X is your question. It doesn't have to be. What kind of stories do we humans buy into that we tell about ourselves and about each other that would lead to the greatest likelihood of the not just survival, but the, I might use the word freedom of the planet and of all of its occupants and its stasis. And when I use the word freedom, I don't mean FREEDUMB that's been, bandied about for a long time in the United States. I think instead of Amartya Sen and his prize for, where he talks about freedom as freedom to be healthy, freedom to be knowledgeable, freedom to breathe clean air. If we could have those stories that reinforce who we are and how we perceive ourselves, and develop, as someone said, love-hate relationship with AI regulation. If that was the thing that guided the regulation of every technology and of how currency exchange happens, how global investment happens, how global market flows happen, how immigration works, then we're made in the shade as a planet. But man, no, it's not happening. And so that's where I'm only up to see that humans could do so much better. And it's kind of like Sen's work, even his earlier work that he did on development in India. It's a 2002 book. It's all there. It's really easy. No, it's hard. And sometimes, and that's how it goes with our personal relationships or with our global relationships. Often the thing that we think is the hardest thing to do, like to tell the truth to our lover, to our children, to our friends, to our presidents, to our political leaders, that's the easiest thing we could do, but we all think it's that hard thing. Now we've got two people running for president in a two-party system. I'm sorry, in a nation where we could have way better options, but we don't. I'm sorry to blow it all up, but forward to November. I think that AI would go a lot better if we had some better options. And that would help us with our regulation. But that's not going to happen in a two-party system in America. Sorry. It's not going to happen.
Well, you're hitting at something that I think is actually really important. And it goes back all the way to one of the places where we started, where we talked about the idea that somebody's programming or training the AI to then have the, buffers where they are and the frame of references where they are. The context is not something that just is blind or naive. It's actually constructed. And we could say that, well, the pessimism, which I also struggle with overcoming most days, Nathan, is because it seems to me that the context, the power structures, the ideological frameworks are not actually, maybe this speaks to the love-hate with AI regulation, they're not actually as democratized as we tell ourselves they are, right? Where if it were the case that we actually expected of each other genuine investment in something like the public good, and we still had private interests relative to our individual joys, but we also recognize that there are constraints on those joys insofar as we also share communities, we share resources, we share catastrophes. Well, then
we share the road.
We share the roads, right? I mean, the Obama "you didn't build that" continues to be, I think, really wise, right? You are inheriting something that other people were invested in making possible. And so you wouldn't need as much regulation if we were all self-regulating in community. But because we've allowed a particular model of, I'd say, rampant individualism disconnected from a sense of deliberative community, it becomes really hard to see how you could get something like this hopeful outcome, right? So yeah, there's my pessimism, but it's I tell Jack this in our presentation that we do around the country. My worry is not about AI, though there are some, like Lauren said, there's some logistical things we can't predict. For me, my worry is tech bros. Like I'm worried about really, really bad actors who are reinforced by a system that says, hey, innovate, but we don't need to actually invite philosophers to think about what innovation means. All we need are business people. And my point is, well, we need both probably. Like the humanities being under assault in America is actually, I think, part of what makes me pessimistic about this amazing promise that otherwise could be made possible in computer science departments. Like that collaborative effort is something I admit drives me to pessimism, even though my own training leans me toward this vision of what could be possible.
Can I jump in? I'm biting my lip so hard. I mean, number one, we need to read Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil. I don't think it's the tech bros. Second, where to go? That when let's see, that TweeML podcast that I talked about, Sam Charrington, who interviews people. The great thing that Sam does is he asks each person in his interview, why did you get into AI? And each one of them has a vibrant personal spin. Means to be a human being. For example, I was a first-generation immigrant to the United States, and I spoke 3 languages, and that got me interested in how grammar works, and now I'm working on LLMs. Or maybe it's that, blah, 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 blah. Lauren's story about Bill Gates being interviewed by whatever his name is, late night person.
Yeah.
And that who's been the main AI innovators always comes from with these great questions. And so the wonderful thing is that I don't know if they're tech bros. And Lee did visual recognition. She's where visual recognition comes from. They're not all bros. I'm sorry, I gotta say that, Aaron. There's amazing people from diverse backgrounds creating the things that we use, and they're magically good people. The rest of us,
I think that's probably right. My thought is more, and maybe I'm loading the bro, right, to say those who are in this with different visions of things like human flourishing, as opposed to how is it that we can, game the system relative to short returns. And that's where I get nervous, right? Is the bro culture that shows up in all sorts of different communities almost never makes it better. It tends to make it exclusive and uninviting and narrow and short-sighted. And I think that though we are all plagued by those temptations, I think that's part of the human condition. It is the case that part of why I think so many folks would say, I don't want to pull cable, I don't want to paint windows, but I want to go into computers, is because I think, again, we've narrated some of that space not as this innovating for human flourishing, innovating for a future that could look different. But it's, here's how you make really quick returns on GameStop stock, right?
Sure.
And for me, that is a concern. But your response is well taken. We've got to be careful not to, in any sense, make a kind of like humanity's enclave that if only they brought us to the table, then we'd tell them how to do it. I'm always reminded of the Princess Bride, no good, I've known too many Spaniards. For me, it's like, no good, I've known too many humanities PhDs. Like, you do not want us trying to fix the world. We're probably really bad at it, right? So.
Oh, man.
I was reading Kara Swisher's new book, where she writes a little bit. It's kind of like a I forget even the title, Burn Book, where she writes a little bit about, it's like her kind of memoir, but also kind of her thoughts on the tech industry and where we're going. And I think that she would echo kind of maybe both of your sentiments. Like, she has a chapter called The Mensches where she talks about the really great people in tech and people she's excited about and trusts. And then, but it's like sprinkled throughout this book that's like mostly, I guess maybe she ends on what you might call a real reluctant optimism, a lot of pessimism though. And she's like, there's a lot of people out there, both who are like terrifyingly normal and in a on a rent sense of like, but also like there's some, mustachioed evil villains. So like there's like a variety of types of people that she is both worried about, but also is excited about in the industry, kind of the spectrum. So I definitely think there's like something to fear from within the tech industry, because the power really is concentrated in the hands of so few, as far as the things we've talked about, right? But I think, but there are some, really amazing, smart folks there as well. That gives at least her as an insight, as like a journalist who's been on the inside, some level of hope.
Yeah. Let's hope.
Yeah,
I'm working to get that link up as we speak. So.
Yeah, and another great book that I used to teach my students was Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression. And the fun thing was that I was teaching a class called Artificial Intelligence and Religion in spring of 2020. And so we were looking at how algorithms are constructed, consideration, cultural norms, how they do, or if those norms are being not accounted for. And it was amazing that our experiment was to game different Google and different social media algorithms. That was our final project for the class. And then 2020 happened with the shutdown, which was great because it augmented our ability to actually test the algorithms, because then we weren't all working from the same IP address. And then they could really see what some people call digital redlining works. If you are a person in a majority Black IP address area of town, that affects your algorithmic results, as opposed to if you're in an IP address of a wealthy neighborhood. In terms of weighting, right? How is the algorithm weighted, right? And of course, search algorithms, search is the basis for LLMs. Like, a lot of the innovations that happened were innovations trying to change how search works. And of course, 2012 is the big year when LLMs exploded in the research community at the University of Toronto. And then it went forward from there. But nevertheless, it was really interesting to see that go. So definitely Burn Book and Algorithms of Oppression are great. Students and lay people figure out a little bit of what's going on inside the black box. It's not a, pardon the essentialism there that Searle had of the Chinese box. It's a black box, right?
Yeah. What other resources have you all found helpful? Maybe not even for like university level or the kind of deep critical stuff that we often do, but I'm even thinking like, how do I help my 15-year-old son navigate this stuff in ways that are productive, so that he's aware he can move into these fields if he decides to, but also that are anchored in something like without wanting to essentialize them, just the kind of classic senses of virtue and community and goodness and being kind. Like, the kinds of freedoms that Amartya Sen will celebrate. Like, how is it that we can balance these out? I know in my life, we have tried hard with my son Atticus. Even in the mornings, we'll drop him off at school. And when he was really little, we used to say to him, who loves you, Atticus? And he'd say, well, mom and you. And then I would say, all right, what do we care about? And he'd say, that I am kind. And I would say, what do we not care about? And he's like, that I am rich. Now, I want him to be, financially well off in our current system. He's got Roth IRAs already established. Like, I'm not saying those are things to ignore, but it is the case that trying to instill in him from kindergarten, are you kind, is the unit of measure that I am way more interested in, man, than, did you sell more snack packs today and make more money and using this to gain social status? And I don't know if it's playing out. I don't know if it works, but when it comes to technology in general, I admit I have a love-hate relationship, because what my son is able to find on YouTube, half the time it is brilliant stuff, right? I mean, he'll show up and he's like, Dad, I figured out how to do this thing, or how to care for this plant, or whatever it is, going back to Jack's account of the gardening, right? But then there's also an awful lot of stuff that's teaching him value sets and what to esteem and how to gain traction and be successful in ways that really do terrify me. So I don't know. What do you all do to kind of walk some of that balance to navigate that?
I don't know if you're talking about AI anymore, but
I think increasingly AI is so deeply integrated into so much of what we do that we don't even know it's there. That like the AI algorithm that is recommending YouTube videos to him, given what he has searched for one time, right? Like he's already being trained, to use the word now loadedly with lots of suitcases. He's being trained by an algorithm that is itself responding to what it's perceiving as the best way for his attention to be increased, right? And so I think that AI, at some level, we're always talking about it when we're trying to think about how do we navigate raising good people in a technological age.
I mean, number one, I think you got to take some perspective on, let's say, your example of YouTube, right? YouTube is a for-profit thing, and what you pay with is with your eyeballs and your clicks, right? And so I try to, you are not using this for free. You are paying for this with your eyeballs and your clicks right now. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm back.
I think one book that I read recently, I was trying to think of something non-academic, but this was the first thing that popped into my mind, that it was a little bit like hopeful, or at least like, okay, like what do we do? How do we be good people in this age? There's a book called Governable Spaces. I was going to drop the link, but you'll find it. Governable Spaces, Democratic Design for Online Life. By Nathan Schneider. It's published by UC Press. And I found it, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm buying from it, but I found it really an interesting way of thinking about some of these questions. Because as I don't know, as much as I get overwhelmed with the amount of stuff, or the thinking about what could be, right, or knowing that I can't know where all of this will take, this kind of Cambrian explosion of new technological future will take us. It's here, it's coming, and there's nothing, we're not just going to all agree to stop. So like it's going to happen. So what can we do to make it beneficial for the most people, I think. And so that's I thought this book was a really interesting framing for that type of thing.
Well, one of the things that I'm so glad you mentioned this book. I have not read it, but one of the things I have been arguing a lot lately in regard to our a kind of disastrous set of options for political leadership, is the radical importance of democratic societies being spaces where real disagreement can happen so that we have checks on our own views. And one of the things that scares me most about the way AI often is used, obviously not exclusively, is to create narrowing and tighter and more insular and more bounded communities, right? Where it is entirely possible just to speak to other people who agree with you because the filters allow that to be possible, that push you even further down rabbit holes, that radicalize us, whatever our views, we get more extreme in those views. Rob Talese has written a lot about this relative to group polarization. And he argues that, technology is a masterful resource if you want to polarize groups. And so how is it that in making democracy a thing that flourishes in light of the rise of not only technology, but specifically AI, that is actively, quote unquote, thinking, how can I produce these outcomes that are then programmed by particular power interests? Maybe one of the things that we can do to both appropriate AI productively and also push back against some of its excesses is find ways, and this is revealing my own set of priorities, but find ways to get outside together, to play softball or take walks or sit around campfires, because then it forces the conversation to be where we have to navigate other ideas and other bodies and other perspectives, which is something I think that AI is making very easy for us not to have to do. What do you think, Lauren? Like, is that even plausible? Like this idea that though technology makes communities good, you said it also can make problematic communities. And one of the ways that I think that plays out is narrowing the sense of to whom I owe responses, right?
Yeah, I don't know. My mind's going so many different places with this. Just thinking about online, like you were mentioning political polarization and online stuff. And I went back to what Jack was saying about like deep fakes and bots, and like, it's unclear who's even on the other, like it's so much content, and it's everywhere all the time. And the speed and the amount are just unprecedented. So sometimes I try to say, you know what, nothing's new under the sun. None of these problems are new. Political polarization has been there before. The 1960s happened, the 18th, whatever, point in time. Like, but then I'm like, but the speed and the speed and the hyper all the time of it is indeed unprecedented. So I don't know. And the addiction issue. So like, just like, the amount that our brains continue to crave content once it's kind of there, and the way that kids, like, I don't know. I was at a workshop last week, and one of the professors was showing their house to us, and they were like, "Oh, you live here on campus. Does it get noisy? Like the dorms are right over there. Does it get noisy with all the parties?" And she just kind of offhand said, "No, everyone's inside playing video games. They're not outside anymore. I hear nothing."
Wow.
And I was like, oh man, wow. I wonder if that's true. So I don't know. I don't know. That's a rambling response to your.
Well, I think you made a really good point there, Lauren, that none of this is new. I mean, there is the concept of digital redlining that I brought up, but we only have that word because of the redlining that happened. There is no world in the United States where groups were not separated from each other through deliberate actions. Let's not fool ourselves. And that if we're talking about technology, all it's doing is augmenting the separations that are already there. What is your school board doing? Do you have a choice district that allows your white kid not to go to school with anyone else? What is your city zoning commission doing? Are they creating economically integrated neighborhoods and developments where poor people and wealthy people actually rub shoulders with each other? Are they allowing developments where the person who uses AI, uses ChatGPT on their Wi-Fi at Starbucks has to sit beside an unhoused person? Probably not. None of this technology is creating these conditions that you name, Aaron. I'm sorry, but it's augmenting what's already there. And as long as people refuse to recognize the structural determinants of what's wrong with American society, they're just shouting into the vortex of nothingness, and they're asking the wrong questions. That's my point. That's what I think.
So there's it seems like in a very real sense, what we're talking about is how do you recognize that you're living in a world of rapid change and navigate it in a healthy way?
Yeah.
I think particularly unhealthy is not recognizing the sort of forces that are underlying your community that lead you to bias, and you don't know it.
Yep.
A friend of mine recommended to me a book that I've just started reading, and I find it very challenging. It's called, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. And it is a book written by a person who was born in 1960 and grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, during the time that Lexington was making the transition from a farm community to one of the highest end suburbs of the Boston area. And how, as a practical matter, there was real bias and a variety of other unhealthy things that were not even recognized until a flashpoint. And it seems like the conversation we're having tonight, the good news about the digital domain is there's some recognition of where the problem areas are.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
And that's
Yeah, go ahead, Nathan.
I mean, here we are, three white people talking, right? Like, if we could get some more voices in, and I think, again, the AI innovating community is a diverse community. Mm-hmm. Let's engage with that tech group. They're not all bros. They're not all white.
Right.
Not all of them are rich. A lot of them are university students doing it like, we got to scratch at the surface somehow.
Yeah. No, that sounds right to me. What then are steps maybe that you would say are, action items that one could take? And as you were thinking about that, I am posting a link to an article about women of color paving the way in AI that I read recently and was absolutely blown away by the amazing things going on. So what are things we can do in practical ways? What would you all suggest as far as moving forward in an AI context? How would we do that?
One of your great ideas, Aaron, is to just get out there and meet people, right? That's a good one. Get outside of your dorm.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, again, the kids who are playing and are using, Discord or whatever they're using now to communicate with each other, sometimes are surprisingly communicating across cultural and linguistic barriers that we're not expecting. Mm-hmm. I mean, so to have some optimism also.
Yeah.
But to get people not only meeting in virtual space like we're doing with everyone who's here today, but also to do it in IRL. And that can be tricky. Of course, there's trust issues. I don't want to only talk about children, but as adults, how do we get out into the world to meet people in meet space? Yeah, put our phones down, as Barclay says. And get out there and meet some folks. Canvas. I don't care who you're voting for. Get out and vote. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing experience. When I go door to door, it's an amazing experience. It's humbling to listen to people and talk. That's a good one. I don't care who you're voting for. Just get out there and vote. And it's for school board. Yeah. Don't do straight ticket. Encourage people not to do straight ticket voting. Sorry, I'm on a tear right now. You can tell I'm voting for Snoopy. But that's one way. Or to make sure that, I don't know, find a hobby where you meet people. I don't know.
Yeah. The other day I was out mountain biking, and it it was the strangest encounter, and yet it absolutely was just breathtakingly cool. I may have actually told this even last week because it was so impactful to me, but I was sitting with some friends, we're out mountain biking, and a group of, it was all men in this case, but it was a group of very different backgrounds, working class, all of us sort of came from, but yet I'm a professor and have a PhD. One of them, had no college education. One had done some tech school. All of us, though, in very different fields. And we started talking actually about the value of college, which I did not bring up for what it's worth. And they were like, you just don't think it's worth anything. Why should we go to college? And what started happening was people, though, in cars near us at the bike park, like overheard and started hopping in the conversation. And it got really cool. This one dude came up and was like, oh, I heard philosophy. You a philosopher? And I was like, well, yeah, I'm a professor of philosophy. And he comes over and starts telling me this view that he holds and, how he actually came up with this view while strung out on meth and how he'd gotten his life straightened out, which led to then conversations with one of the guys who I was with about getting sober recently. And like, it was this conversation about something abstract, what's the value of college, became a very human space for being able to invest in each other. I have no idea what the political views of these people are, but the fact that we all were connecting in ways that I would say really matter. They were phenomenologically affective, right? And it was facilitated by the fact that we were at a bike park doing something that we thought was worth doing. In my book, Camping with Kierkegaard, I call this worthy of our finitude. What's worthy of the life we have? And how do we find ways to then be excited about other people who also are doing what they think is worthy of their finitude, even if it doesn't look like what you do, right? There might be different ways forward. And so, yeah, Nathan, I constantly think, how can I put myself in spaces that force me to interact with people who I wouldn't otherwise have to talk to? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, but it's also sometimes the thing that makes possible meeting that dude who I would never have met because he was from Knoxville and was over riding bikes for an afternoon. And yet we had a human interaction, and it was fantastic. It was absolutely wonderful. Jack, what's this look like in retirement? Oh, go ahead, Lauren, please.
Okay.
Oh, no, just as a way for me to sign off. I think that to kind of combine the kind of, because I'm looking in the comments, the sort of what you're saying, Aaron, and like to put your phone down and face-to-face connection, but also thinking about how there's another comment that says perhaps we could revive and encourage local news run by communities. So I think that's what Nathan Schneider's book was getting at, which was we can have these communities where people you would normally interact with, diverse groups of people, if you take more ownership in governing those spaces to make them more democratic and less feudal. Like that's like kind of the core of his argument. So maybe taking some of the sentiment that we're getting at with the out in the world and be like, imagine online being out in the world. Because in my own research, one of the things I was seeing with the trad communities online was that while more people have more voices, or different people have powerful voices within the church communities, it didn't democratize Catholic communities, right? The algorithmic culture and the sort of platformatization further concentrated cultural power just in different spaces. And what Nathan Schneider's book was saying is that like that wouldn't happen. They wouldn't get feudalized like that if more people would take ownership in the spaces and get out there and start interacting and that kind of stuff. So maybe that's one way to sort of combine the IRL and the sentiment to get out there.
That's nice. Wonderful. Great. Yeah. And Jack, I wanted to ask you then, and then we're going to move to a kind of fun way to close out our evening together. But you have written, you said it had nothing to do with our topic tonight, but maybe it does in this respect. You've written some amazing books about finding joy, purpose, meaning in retirement. And I would love to know kind of like how, especially in the kinds of spaces where you find yourself, the communities that you are navigating, are there distinctive, different, the same? Like, I mean, what is it that maybe, we've talked about raising kids, we've talked about schools, local communities. affinity groups, but what about also in, things like the retirement community in which you find yourself? How do we facilitate this kind of flourishing there?
Well, so, I mean, that's a complicated question, but I do think that one kind of underlying reality is that as we age, we realize more and more that we have that our domain of influence is quite narrow, and it may and as a practical matter, maybe it's always been narrow, but we become more aware of that, I think, as we continue to mature. And so I think it causes, I'll speak personally, it causes me to think about, all right, how can I be a force for good in my little circle of influence today? Because, I once interacted with people who were like in Google leadership and so forth, but that's not where I am anymore. And as a practical matter, it's probably those local impacts and not the things that we see as potentially broader that are important. I'll just say one more thing about, a sense of self-worth in life beyond full-time work. We found in interviews we did of pre-retirees and retirees around the country that it's important when you stop working full-time to purposely engage in something else that you find meaningful beyond work. And that looks very different for different people.
That's wonderful. Well, before we close out, this has been a wide-ranging conversation, which I expected nothing less, given that we are none of us technically computer scientists. For what it's worth, we might do another episode where we do that. But since I'm a philosopher thinking about questions that hit on other disciplinary areas from a kind of humanistic set of assumptions and backgrounds, I think is especially interesting. And so thank you all for doing that with me. But now we're going to close out with 5 questions that I ask all of my guests around the campfire. So the first, would you rather be at the beach or the mountains? Lauren, beach or mountains?
Beach.
All right. Nathan?
Oh, man, I'm going to the beach place next week, but I like mountains. Maybe can I go to the mountains or the meat?
The mountains, the beach.
I mean, I'll do a
Jack,
Zen koan. I'll do a Zen koan. Mountains are beaches. Beaches are mountains. Right? There we go.
There you go. I think that's entirely perfect. Jack, what about you? Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
All right. When you are at the campfire, hot chocolate, hot tea, or coffee? We'll go reverse order. Jack, hot chocolate, hot tea, or coffee?
Oh, hot chocolate every time.
Oh, so you and me are right there together. What about that, Nathan?
Tea at 5 a.m., coffee at 6 a.m., hot cocoa at 10 p.m.
Very Hegelian. All of the above. That's right. Lauren, hot chocolate, hot tea, or coffee?
Decaf.
Decaf. Okay. So favorite campfire food other than s'mores? Nathan, I know you spend a lot of time around them. What's your favorite campfire food other than s'mores?
I'll have to say, because my son compliments me, he has a thing that I make called camping stew that he even asks for during the week when we're not camping.
I love it. You get that little backyard fire pit where you can go make it over the fire, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Jack, favorite camping food other than s'mores?
I don't have one. Sorry to say.
You and me got to go camping. We've got to go camping more often then, Jack. We got to get you out there.
I'll bring the
What about it, Lauren?
This is in no way a camping food. It has nothing to do with fire, but it's just something that we always happen to bring and that we only eat it there. It's just like peanut butter on our celery. I don't know why. Like, I never buy celery, but like that's what we do. I don't know why.
I love it. I think that works really, really well. when Nathan and I go mountain biking together, taking tortillas and peanut butter and then any other thing you can put in, stick a banana in it. You know, if you slice some apples, all those are good.
Roll it up.
Roll it up. All right, 2 more questions. So if you've got to have music at the campfire, what's the instrument you want played? So are you a guitar by the campfire, a harmonica? Do you like sing-alongs? What music are we doing, or bringing your, powered speaker and playing a playlist? What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, a guitar is nice. I think a little sing-along situation.
I said a little folk music. I wrote a piece this week on Substack about protest songs. So I think some protest guitar songs around the campfire would work. Nathan, what about you? What kind of music by the campfire?
I mean, a Seagull S6 acoustic is beautiful, especially when it has the oak top on it. It resonates quite nicely. So, I mean, I'll put a pitch in there for Seagull guitars.
All right. And I'm...
and they're affordable. Otherwise, I play a Greenfield, but that's completely unaffordable, and I will never touch one in my entire life.
Oh, well, that's I can't bring drum. I'm a professional drummer, so bringing a kit out it doesn't quite make its way into my backpacking gear. It's a little heavy. Jack, what about you? What kind of music would you like?
Guitar,
by the campfire?
By all means.
Guitar. All right. Final question: if you could take one philosopher camping with you, alive or dead, who would you take camping with you to sit at the campfire and have a conversation with? Which philosopher? Nathan, which one?
Oh, God, which philosopher? Could I please wait for a second? I need to think.
All right, Lauren, who would you take with you?
I'm trying to decide if I want to go old or like a living or a dead, or like, do I want to go ancient or yeah. I guess since Nathan already mentioned Anna Arendt, we'll get a lady in there.
Ooh, that'd be a great choice. I love that.
The one that popped into my head, actually, I was thinking about her today, was Sarah Ahmed. That's where I would go.
Critical phenomenology. That would be really cool. Very cool. All right, Jack, what about you? What philosopher would you take with you?
Yeah, this person is really not a philosopher per se, but brings a lot to philosophy of religion through his studies, and it's N.T. Wright.
Oh, yeah. N.T. Wright. Very interesting stuff. Last week, I said I would take Simone de Beauvoir. And this week, I actually think I'm going to stay with Simone, but I'm going to take Simone Weil because I hate that she died so early. And I would love to hear more of her thoughts because her writing, I think, just continues to pique my interest and propel me in really cool directions. So, well, thank you all so much. Our time spent by the campfire tonight has been absolutely worthy of my finitude. And I've been plugging all of y'all's stuff all night. If anybody's interested in my recent book, Camping with Kierkegaard, please get a copy of that. That's where this campfire philosophy kind of originated, is thinking about that together. So I can't thank you enough, Jack, Nathan, Lauren. You all have pushed me in ways that I will continue to wrestle with, I'm sure, for a very long time. To everybody who has been watching in all the live stream platforms, thank you. To anybody listening to it later on all of the regular podcast distribution platforms, thank you so much. You can always reach out to me just at my website, jaaronsimmons.com. Also get connected with me at Substack, where I post 2 posts a week. And I think it's some interesting stuff. And in fact, given our music conversation every Monday for paid subscribers, I talk about philosophy and music in different genres. Again, this week just came out this morning, was about protest songs. So I would love to get connected with you. And big thanks to plankship.org, to Dan Sanderson for all his work putting together this podcast, for his sponsorship. Do go over there, get signed up, use Aaron as a code and get 50% off. So thank you all so much. We will see you next week here on Campfire Philosophy every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time through July and August. Thank you all again. It has been absolutely my pleasure. To all of you, have a wonderful, wonderful night, and we'll see you next time. On the
trail, for hiking with me a few miles more, for casting out your line into waters in which we both stand, for dropping in at the top and fist bumping me at the bottom, and for coming camping with me and Kierkegaard. Our time together has been so very worthy of my finitude. I hope it was worthy of yours as well.